the Jordan River. A 200-mile border separating the present-day Kingdom of Jordan from Israel and the West Bank. In 1400 BC, this waterway represented one of the final obstacles to the wandering Israelites' long-awaited entrance into the Promised Land.
The Ark of the Covenant comes into its own when Joshua was given the task of leading Israel across the Jordan River. And the story is that the Ark of the Covenant would go first and be carried into the Jordan River.
Some energy came forth from the ark, causing the waters to literally stop and ascend, and therefore creating dry land for the entire children of Israel to pass on off into the Holy Land.
But if this biblical story is true, what kind of power could the Ark of the Covenant have possessed that would cause a raging river to stand still?
What if the people who wrote these stories were simply reporting on what they were actually seeing? If that's true, then the Ark of the Covenant clearly represents a technology that is more advanced than anything we have now.
If you want to part water, maybe a good way to do it would be with high-speed winds. Because if you blow enough air, you can get the water out of the way, and you can actually maybe even form those two walls of water.
There's some kind of technology that they're using, and it's so that they can accomplish their goals and continue on their journey, and they're able to use this extraterrestrial technology to do it.
According to the Bible's book of Joshua, the Ark of the Covenant once again proved a powerful ally when the Israelites arrived on the western banks of the Jordan River, set on conquering the seemingly impenetrable walled city of Jericho.
The reputation of the Israelites preceded them. People were terrified. They ever heard the rumors of the power of this great and awesome ark. They now come to the city of Jericho. The people were commanded by God to march around the city walls.
They march around the city once on the first day. The next day they do the very same thing. The third, fourth, fifth, and sixth day it's the same thing. On the seventh day, they march around and then they blow the trumpets and all the people shout.
Between the marching of the feet, the sounding of the ram's horns, the shofar, and with some power not described from the ark, it enabled the big stone mighty walls of the city of Jericho to somehow be vibrated with a earthquake-type force, which caused them to collapse.
When I hear that they had to walk around Jericho 7 times, and then the trumpets were the ones that allowed for those walls to crumble, one would have to ask yourselves, was there something else to it?
Knocking something down like a wall with pressure is not inconceivable. So you could imagine trying to do this. Now, when you look at things, think of standard examples that we experience. When the space shuttle lands, we get the sonic boom. And you can feel it rattling the walls, and you can actually hear it. That's far away. Imagine getting a sonic boom closer to the object. You might be able to do significant damage to the wall.
The methods used to build huge megalithic structures such as Pumapunku and the pyramids of Egypt remain a mystery. But what about the tools used to build them? Where are they? And might they provide a clue as to how these enormous stone structures were created?
A lot of the real ancient, mysterious work was done at a time when there was no steel. And the copper they had was, yeah, they could harden it by cold hammering it, but still wouldn't make a dent in rocks like basalt and granite. So they would have had to use, much more labor's techniques or they had some sort of advanced technology which escapes me. And I've been in the business 40 years.
The tools and machines must have been equal to the task of actually building the pyramids, crafting those statues to such a high order of precision, crafting those boxes to a modern-day precision that we find in our inspection lab. And the big question, where are the tools?
In the late 19th century, British archaeologist Sir Flinders Petrie scoured Egypt, looking not for the biggest items, but the smallest.
Petrie was absolutely fascinated by the technical achievements of the Egyptians, particularly the early Egyptians. He constantly was looking for how they made things, how they developed things, how they continued to sort of basically perfect their tools.
We're normally taught that the ancient Egyptians had simple tools, and what Petrie brought out is information that seems to actually argue against that notion.
This is an example of a drill hole. You can see the very fine lines on it. You can see the technology that's made to use it. You can see how it's a perfect hole almost all the way through, but it tapers at one end. This is the fragment of a diorite bowl. It's one of the hardest substances, and you can see on this fragment that there's a lathe mark, which is really interesting that they managed to make such a mark in such a hard material.
Among all the tools discovered by Petrie, however, one stood out from all the rest. While working inside the Great Pyramid, Petrie stumbled across a tubular drill made of granite.
Tubular drills amongst the ancient Egyptians were actually fairly common. I mean, Petrie found quite a few of them. The interesting thing about the one that he found in Giza is that such hard stone that was so carefully curved, precisely grooved. As you can see, it's got very, very fine markings on it, basically lines, literally a couple of millimeters apart. You can see it goes all the way around, very, very accurately, hardly any waves at all. He was absolutely amazed by this. He kept returning to it throughout his life. His theory was that the Egyptians must have had access to diamonds or some kind of jewel that would have cut it. The interesting thing about Petrie's theory about how these drill lines were made was that he never discovered any diamonds in ancient Egypt. So where were they? Where did they go? We don't know.
If the ancient Egyptians didn't possess diamonds, how were the precision grooves cut onto the granite drill? Did Petrie accidentally discover a tool made by extraterrestrials? Machinist expert Chris Dunn attempted to answer this question by creating his own granite drill, using the known tools and techniques of the ancient Egyptians.
In order to test the Egyptologist theory about how the ancient Egyptians drilled into granite, I took a tube and a fixed a crank on it and actually used sand and silicon carbide. And after many hours of turning and drilling into this piece of granite, finally got deep enough that I could actually pop a core out. And the reason for that was to actually look at the surface, not just of the hole, but of the core.
The next step was to use a high-tech industrial microscope to compare his drill core to a latex copy of the one at the Petrie Museum.
We have under the microscope the core that we drilled with the copper tube and sand. And as you can see, the surface of the core, the striations are not very clear. There's nothing really distinctive in terms of the feed of the tool marks. using sand and copper. Now, bringing the latex that they took of the core in the Petrie Museum, and we see something totally different. The striations are very clear, and they're quite deep. The devil is actually in the details, and the details of this particular artifact are what I consider to be a smoking gun in terms of what level of technology we give the ancient Egyptians credit for.
Did aliens really inspire our ancestors to build ancient temples and pyramids? And if they came here, did they leave behind any advanced knowledge of physics, astronomy, or mathematics? If so, is there any evidence that remains to this day? One example might be this one. Often described as the world's first mechanical computer, it dates back over 2,000 years.
The Antikythera device was found in 1900 by sponge divers diving off a small island in the Aegean called Antikythera. There was a shipwreck there, and in it was a coral-encrusted box, and it was made of metal alloys. And it then went to the Athens Museum, where a good 50 years later, they were able to X-ray this box, and they were able to discern cogged wheels that were interconnected and give us a very good depiction of what this thing was. And it is a computer. It's a really sophisticated machine.
It's a very interesting piece of technology because it served two purposes. One was that it was an astronomical device where you could, by using it, chart your position to the stars and navigate your way through the seas. It was also an astrological device so that someone could tell you, if you were born on this date and your planet sign is this, then certain things are going to happen to you when the planets are in this alignment. So it was a very interesting piece of technology that literally had more complicated gears and inner workings than a modern-day Swiss watch. And it's found to be dated, I think, like 200 BC, so it's really an anomaly as to who could have created that and what it was being used for.
When archaeologists first started to examine this thing in the 1950s, they said that they never could conceive of the ancient Greeks having such complicated machinery. And in fact, they said this was tantamount to finding a jet airplane in the tomb of King Tut.
Even older than the Antikythera mechanism are these carvings on a wall at the Dendera Temple complex in Egypt. To some, the strange designs look eerily similar to objects very much in use today.
In Egypt, there is this underground crypt at Dendera that was always secret, and only the high priests had access to that crypt. And it's very hot in there, very narrow, low ceiling, and on the walls you have these reliefs of what looks like ancient light bulbs. Because we have to question one thing: how did the ancient Egyptians light the inside of their tombs?
According to most mainstream archaeologists, torches were used by the ancient Egyptians to light the pitch-black chambers of tombs and temples. Yet nowhere on the ceilings is there even the slightest evidence of soot or smoke residue.
There isn't enough oxygen inside those tombs with which to support or feed a flame of a torch. The only remaining solution is by some sort of an artificial light source. And that is, for example, a light bulb. So at an underground crypt at Dendera, we find reliefs of such light bulbs.
But how could the ancient Egyptians have used anything resembling a modern-day light bulb without access to electricity. After all, electricity wouldn't be discovered for thousands of years. That is, of course, with the exception of what scientists call the Baghdad Battery.
The Baghdad Battery was discovered in ancient Iraq. Scholars today say there's no way that ancient man was using electricity or light bulbs. So they look at this Baghdad Battery, and there's about a dozen of them that have been found in Iraq. And the only mainstream theory is that they were using it for electroplating jewelry.
Two major proponents of ancient alien theory, Jason Martell and Giorgio Tsoukalos, demonstrate just how the Baghdad Battery could generate electricity using a modern mock-up of the device.
Well, basically this is made out of a clay pot, clay just found naturally in that region in southern Iraq. And then they would use a small copper lining and something along the lines of an asphalt stopper wrapped around an iron rod. And these all applied together, and the combination of some weak acetic acid, vinegar, grape juice, orange juice in this case, wine, would be able to generate a charge by combining these elements with the iron rod and the copper, and the combination of that creates an abundance of electricity. So what we're gonna do is basically just fill the clay pot with some orange juice here. I'll try not to spill it too much. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and put the copper rod back in there. Copper and iron rod. We'll give it a moment to kind of fill that copper area there. And then by turning on the voltmeter and applying this to each side, we should be able to generate a charge. And there it goes, into the positive. And if we give it some time to get the electrolytes really buzzing in there, you'll see that this volt will actually continue to rise.
It is a battery, everybody agrees with that, but nobody knows why they made it and how they made it. What mind would think of that? You know, electrical current backed several thousand years ago? It's very strange, but it's clearly a battery.
The whole idea that ancient civilizations actually had knowledge of electricity and used electricity is an accepted archaeological fact today. Just like in our own civilization, where about 200 years ago, Benjamin Franklin and other scientists began experimenting with simple electrical devices, we now have evidence that over 3,000 years ago, people were also experimenting with electrical devices.
In today's largest construction sites and quarries, huge mega machines are used to dig, cut, and lift stone. These man-made creatures dwarf their creators and perform the work of thousands of men using modern hydraulic technologies. Without such equipment, builders could never construct modern skyscrapers. Yet thousands of years ago, ancient civilizations were accomplishing the same work while constructing their monuments and temples using massive stones. These enormous blocks, many weighing in excess of 100 tons, would be a challenge even for today's engineers. Yet thousands of years ago, people cut them out of solid rock, transported them for miles, and then lifted them precisely into place. But how? Did they cut these massive stone blocks with hammers, chisels, and copper wire, as mainstream archaeologists suggest? Could they have lifted and transported them without a pulley system or the wheel? Or did ancient civilizations possess advanced technologies that have since been lost to science?
At Giza, you just don't have the pyramids. Linked to the pyramids are what Egyptologists call valley temples. It doesn't take a rocket engineer that when you go there, there's something not quite right here. Whereas the pyramids are built with blocks of 2 to 3 tons, these temples, which are minute compared to the pyramids, are built with blocks of 100 tons, and some of them 200 tons. Now, let me tell you what a 100-ton block is. If you take 100 family cars and you squeeze them together, you get one of these blocks. First of all, let alone how they move these blocks, is why would they want to use 100-ton blocks? It simply doesn't make sense.
There's no reason for them to want to build out of granite blocks the size of a semi-truck. It's like, okay, let's do something, but let's do it as difficult as we could possibly do it.
The reason why I am convinced that sophisticated technology was utilized in these ancient rocks is because if we go to a stone quarry today and look at the scope of machinery required to accomplish similar things, those machines are huge.
Subscribers to Ancient Alien Theory do not believe extraterrestrials built these amazing monuments, but instead provided some type of technological know-how or tools to our ancestors. Engineering expert Chris Dunn has spent several decades researching the construction tools used by the ancient Egyptians.
We're normally taught by Egyptologists that the ancient Egyptians had simple tools. They went to work every day using stone balls, copper chisels, a copper tube and sand to grind holes in diorite and granite, extremely hard rock. From what I have actually gathered over the years is information that seems to actually argue against that notion that they had simple tools.
In Egypt, Dunn was able to examine ancient sites firsthand. What he found has proved to be both revolutionary and controversial.
If you look at the Giza Plateau and all the stones that they actually placed in the Great Pyramid and Khafre's Pyramid and Menkaura's Pyramid, 2.5 million blocks of stone in the Great Pyramid alone. They had to have had some efficient means of cutting them to size and putting them into place. They had to have had somebody on site who's saying, okay, I need a block this size, and then getting a block to them that size, stat, like immediately.
While searching several miles north of Giza at Abu Ruwash, Dunn stumbled upon a clue when he spotted a granite block containing a deep cut.
When I first saw it, I just didn't know what to make of it. And it was only after puzzling over it for days and sometimes waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, scratching my head and thinking, well, how did they make this cut? And finally to realize that the only way that they could have actually cut that thing was with a saw that was 35 feet in diameter.
The idea that ancient Egyptians used giant saws provoked much resistance from mainstream archaeologists. Dunn, however, was convinced.
As an ex-machinist, I look for tool marks. I look for them everywhere I go. And I could be accused of, well, you know, if you're going to look for something, you're probably going to find it because you're looking at it through a certain filter. Accepted, I agree. But the question is, why is it there? Clearly, to me, that is a machine mark. But there were no machines back then. So what do? I just go looking for more machine marks, and they're all over the place. You find them on statues, you'll find them particularly in the Luxor Museum. There seems to be an impression on the side of Amun's buttock where it meets the bench, where there is an undercut. It was the slip of a tool, and therefore it must have been a tool that was quite efficient.
Paola, Malta. Deep beneath this small town in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea rests one of the oldest subterranean structures in the world.
On the islands of Malta, there are prehistoric remains that are comprised of megalithic underground sites, which were considered to be communal burial sites. The most famous of these is the Halsafleni Hypogeum. Halsafleni dates back to about 6,000 years ago.
It's multi-layered, 3 major levels, and it's really just astounding to have carved it into the limestone. I'm a geologist. I know how difficult it is to engineer something like that and carry it out. To me, it shows incredible sophistication on a technological basis. I can't claim that I know exactly how they did it.
When the Hall Saflieni hypogeum was first discovered in 1902, archaeologists were astounded to find buried within it more than 7,000 skeletons. In May 1920, a National Geographic article reported that many of the remains were those of humans that were long-skulled. But during World War II, the site was plundered by vandals, and the skeletons mysteriously disappeared. Luckily, 11 of the elongated skulls were salvaged, and at least one of these displays a non-human feature. It is missing the sagittal suture that connects the parietal bones on all human skulls.
A bizarre report came from a woman named Lois Jessup, who had worked for the British consulate in Malta. She had been visiting the hypogeum and had convinced one of the caretakers to let her go into the lowest chamber. She claimed that she came out into a ledge in a great fissure that was beneath Malta. And on a ledge on the other side of the fissure, she claimed she saw very tall men.
According to her account, she saw about 20 white-haired giants that looked up at her and motioned her to come down. One has to wonder if the hypogeum has some sort of an extraterrestrial presence.
As incredible as Lois Jessup's story may be, perhaps the most extraordinary discovery at the hypogeum has to do with sound. In February of 2014, archaeoacoustics researcher Linda Enix gathered an assemblage of audio, geology, and archaeology experts to test the acoustic properties of the most mysterious chamber in the site, known as the Oracle Room. After extensive testing, Linda and her team reached an incredible conclusion. The entire hypogeum resonates at the specific frequency of 110 hertz.
You physically feel the vibration of that sound in your whole body. It was mesmerizing.
Sound is created by the vibration of an object, which causes the air surrounding it to vibrate and form a wave.
Depending on the frequency it oscillates with, that will determine the note or the tone you hear. Hertz is the unit we use to measure frequency. It's basically the number of oscillations per second. Resonance is basically whenever something is vibrating, that frequency matches the natural frequency or vibration of the object. This is really important with sound applications. If you take an enclosed space, the way you get a resonance is to make the size of the room or space match the frequencies and wavelength of the sound you're trying to achieve, so that when it hits the ends of the walls, it reflects just right. These reflections build up the sound or magnitude of that vibration.
What is going on here, and why are they specifically using that frequency? So you have to wonder whether extraterrestrials weren't involved in tuning the hypogeum to create this special frequency.
And what I have always found fascinating is that we have stories of these magical incantations.
Right.
But you know, operating something with voice commands, if you don't know what that is, that's a magical incantation.
This is the interesting thing, because when you look at the Ark of the Covenant, you look at the high priest. The high priest, of course, would speak to God, wearing the breastplate of judgment, which had the 12 stones on it. The high priest would approach the Ark of the Covenant, and he would start to recite certain tones, sounds. These were very deep, tonal, throat-type chants. The tones were said to then cause the stones to vibrate, and they would send out lights, and then the Ark somehow would react to this. There's some active energy there, which we call the glory or kavod of God. It's not God, but it's some actual energy field that if you would be in the presence,
remember, you couldn't go into
or a
the
machine.
presence.
That's right.
Something was there that if you went too close, you died.
I'll tell you exactly what that sounds to me like. This breastplate has optical and or acousto-optical transceivers on it, and they are handshaking, which is what the old school acoustic phone modems would do when you would call up or the fax machine calls up to connect to the other side.
What we're seeing here is that they would use sound to link heaven and earth.
The idea that sound can facilitate communication between man and divine beings, like the Hindu use of Om, is a common theme in religious traditions throughout the world.
All religions really use music, and you see that in worship services. So the cantor with the psalms in the Jewish traditions, choir in Christian traditions, even in the Islamic tradition where there's no formal music, there's a melody to the recitation of the Quran. Every culture has the idea that this music connects us with the divine.
For many religious practices, just as important as musical traditions are the locations in which the rituals are performed.
A choir singing in Chartres Cathedral is magical because of the architectural space. And so these architectural spaces in all these various cultures, from these kind of secret monasteries in the Far East and in the Middle East, were famous for having architectural designed spaces that call up the sacred.
Interestingly, a growing number of archaeologists believe some of the world's oldest structures were specifically designed to accentuate acoustic properties.
Like all of you, I'm always keeping up on the latest archaeological developments and research, and I think it's really fascinating that monuments worldwide have acoustic properties.
What they're finding is that these were chambers that were designed where you would have this acoustic experience that you heard, but you also felt it in your bones, in your tissue.
Yeah, they call this archaeoacoustics.
Archaeoacoustics is an interdisciplinary field of archaeology dedicated to examining how sound and acoustics were utilized in the ancient world.
It's a relatively new field, and archaeoacoustics is looking at the sound quality of ancient sites, historical sites, archaeological sites, where we see music probably played a role. Stonehenge is one of those. Where you stand in the middle of Stonehenge, you would create the sound blast of music, whatever implements were used, because we're not really sure. And it would bounce off those stones and create this sort of echo chamber.
Stonehenge functioned as a sonic temple. By this, what I mean is that individuals in the center of the monument would create musical sounds, particularly of a low frequency, that would be contained actually inside the stones and build up an energy, if you like, for a purpose which we can only guess at right now.
All around the world, archaeologists have identified numerous ancient sites that were designed according to acoustic principles, such as Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, the Hypogeum in Malta, and the Newgrange Passage tomb in Ireland.
Newgrange has very strong acoustic properties. What they found is that the way the sound waves bounce around the chamber, they create what's called standing waves, and they increase in intensity and sound.
According to some researchers, curious carvings found inside Newgrange provide key evidence documenting that the structure was purposely designed to have elaborate acoustic properties.
And it seems that these were standing waves recorded actually within the chamber itself, where you can see these zigzags carved all over the place, suggesting that they not only understood acoustics, but they were recording the experience within the chambers. The other thing of real interest is the fact that when they investigated the corbelled roof, which is like multiple mega-sized stones, almost going around a spiral, they found that these had been adjusted, and they found the reason for that was because they were tuning the chamber acoustically.
Samos, Greece, 535 BC. 35-year-old mathematician and philosopher Pythagoras leaves his home to travel to Egypt and study the esoteric arts. He becomes initiated into the Egyptian priesthood and eventually founds a school where his pupils are sworn to secrecy. Despite his mysterious nature, Pythagoras would share with the world groundbreaking mathematical concepts, and he believed that through his study of both music and the movement of the planets, he had uncovered the sacred code of the universe.
The ancients realized that they were wandering objects called planets. And because they moved, perhaps encoded in the motion of these planets was our destiny, the future. That there was a rhyme and reason to the radii of the orbits of the planets. The music of the spheres. That these spheres, when they rotate, create music according to certain ratios found in music. The person who first understood the laws of music was Pythagoras. He worked out the laws of music, that music is divided into 12 notes.
Pythagoras had this notion that the music of the spheres, that the harmony, the sound that moved the planets around was also the sound that would keep the body in alignment. So above as below, that we would be in sync with the movements of our own galaxy because of this musical pattern that suffused everything. There are 12 tones in the musical system, so there's a 12ness to the way the galaxies are harmonized, to the way our bodies might be in sync with everything, all through the 12 tones of a musical scale.
An octave has 12 steps to it, and that became the origin of the mathematics of music. Well, today we believe that string theory, which is what I do for a living, is based on the harmonies of vibrating strings. We now believe that all the subatomic particles in the universe, neutrons, protons, quarks, are nothing but different vibrations of a tiny rubber band. And so what is the universe? The universe is a symphony of strings. And therefore, what is the mind of God that Albert Einstein wrote about so eloquently for the last 30 years of his life? According to string theory, the mind of God would be cosmic music resonating through hyperspace. That is the mind of God.
Is humanity's modern understanding of the physics of the universe just now allowing us to comprehend the esoteric knowledge of our ancestors? Knowledge that was perhaps given to them by extraterrestrials for future generations to rediscover.
So if the number 12 is sacred to the physical world, we should question why. And in modern science, we're beginning to have an answer and to ultimately receive the revelation of the wisdom of God, symbolized by the number 12. So the number 12 is out there, but it could only be comprehended when the mind contemplates the reality of the physical world. And then by doing that, through the power of perception, the power of perception influences space and time, and therefore changes the whole physical world as we know it.
Ancient religious leaders, commonly known as shaman, were seen as links between humans and a higher realm. For the shaman, sound was not used merely to make a spiritual connection with the divine, but to actually interact with otherworldly beings.
The term shaman comes from Siberian religious practices, and it means somebody who can see the underlying fabric of the world around them. These are the negotiators between this world and the other world. They could step into the other world to negotiate with otherworldly forces.
Individuals, shamans, when they chanted, when they sung,
when they used the instruments, it was to enter into altered states of consciousness so that they could communicate with spirit entities and perhaps connect with what we might describe as ancient aliens.
The point is that the shamanistic practices all built upon what? Chants, sounds, altered states of consciousness, which bring you into connection with extraterrestrials, aliens, whatever is out there.
That's a really interesting point, Rabbi. You know, we have discovered that sound waves can actually control our brain.
In the 1960s, neuroscientists discovered that rhythm and acoustics can produce a physiological change in the human brain through a process known as entrainment.
If I can create a pulsing in the external environment that's pulsing at a brainwave speed, my brainwaves will try to match that speed to save energy, and my consciousness will change in the process. So we can do that using just a drum to change consciousness at will. If I hook you up to an EEG machine so I can look at your brainwaves, and normally when we're awake, my brainwaves are generating beta function, which is rapid, between 13 hertz and 38. And the drum beat is at 5. And my brainwaves are going to start slowing down and slowing down, slower, to take my consciousness from a waking state into a dream state without going to sleep first, which means that's a classic definition of a trance. The earliest examples of brain entrainment would be shamanic drumming. The speed of the drum beat tends to be around 5 hertz, and that's about like this. That's about it. That's about 5 hertz. And 5 hertz is where your brain goes when you're dreaming at night. The whole idea is to transform consciousness.
They were trying to achieve a connection with the divine, with the otherworldly.
If modern science has proven that shamanic drumming does, in fact, induce a state of trance, could it also be true that it enables extrasensory abilities and even allows for communication with other realms? While it may sound like a far-fetched notion, in 1995, the U.S. government revealed that brain entrainment was part of its top-secret spy program called Project Stargate. Operatives in this clandestine unit gathered intelligence about persons, places, and events from great distances by sensing with their minds, a practice called remote viewing. During the 1970s, President Jimmy Carter's administration used remote viewers to locate a downed Russian spy plane in Africa.
You talk to any of the old remote viewers, the ones from the Stargate program, they'll tell you how accurate and how important and how relevant their information was.
John Vivanco has been working in the field of remote viewing as both a teacher and practitioner for more than 20 years.
I worked with corporations, intelligence, counterterror for the FBI after 9/11.
At the start of every remote viewing session, John uses specific sounds to entrain his brainwaves and create a trance-like state.
What we do with remote viewing before we do a session is a cool down. We will meditate, and one of the aids that we'll use are binaural beats. So if you think about frequencies in the ear, we'll listen to these sounds. So if one ear is pulsing a sound of, let's just say, 6 hertz, and in another ear it's pulsing a sound of 4 hertz, your brain waves will synchronize to around 5 hertz. And we like to stay in that zone in order to get the best information.
John claims that by entering this trance state, remote viewers have gathered more than just information. They have also encountered otherworldly beings.
And we were working a project around the Arecibo Radio Observatory, and I was the first viewer on this particular tasking. And I start to get these beings, these aliens. I just remember during the session, I kept saying, they're coming, they're coming, they're coming. And they started to take notice of me. And I'm starting to freak out because I've got tons of adrenaline flowing through me. I'm in fight or flight. It telepathically communicated with me, and it said, we are here to help you, and we want you to help us. The other viewers started to experience the same thing. And so that's when we started to, okay, now, I'm not hallucinating. This is absolutely real.